Hi, my name is Chantal Mullen, and I'm a horticulturalist in the southwest region of Virginia. And in Virginia right now, it's fall. So one of the things that we need to be doing before replanting in our gardens is cleaning. Most people know about clearing out your summer annuals, weeding your gardens, and composting leaves, and proper mulching. But today I want to talk about overwintering. And I want to focus on overwintering of tender herbaceous perennials in particular. Overwintering is a process by which we keep plants safe in a dormant season, away from a frost or freezing temperatures that can damage the plants. This can look like digging up a plant and repotting it and bringing it indoors, like this plant is right here, and placing it in a sunny window. Sometimes, though, you can't do that, either due to spatial limitations of your house, or just due to the sheer quantity of plants that you're trying to overwinter or keep for next year. So when bringing your plants indoors in a pot is impossible, you're going to look at dry storage. And you can use these techniques with any bulbs, rhizomes, tubers, or corms that your plants may have. I have a great example here of a need to overwinter with this Alocasia Macrorrhizos. It's commonly known as an elephant ear. These are really cool plants. Kids really love these plants because they just get so enormous. They are great in landscape. They have a very dramatic presence, and it can give a really tropical look to any garden. These Alocasias have this long arching petiole right here that really lets these leaves sort of float above the stalks. Mature leaves can get anywhere from 1 to 2 feet all the way up to 5 by the end of a growing season. Now, Alocasia is closely related to a Colocasia, and I want to point out that there are a few ways that you can determine which plant you actually have. The main one is that Alocasia is going to have a different leaf orientation than a Colocasia. The Alocasia, which this is this plant right here, and you can see this, it has an upright pointing leaf. Sometimes they can be horizontal like this, but they're never drooping down. And the reason for this is the petiole right here is much more rigid, and it actually will continue up onto the back side of the leaf and to the underside of the midrib. And that allows it to point towards the sky. It just gives it the support that it needs to do that. And the Colocasia, on the other hand, its leaves, again, it will point down, and it doesn't have that support system. The second way that you can differentiate between an Alocasia and a Colocasia is its root structure. And before I go any further, I want to say that this is a great example for using reputable sources to find your information, especially when you're online. I like to always do thorough research before I present any information to the public. And when I was researching for the Alocasia, I actually found that there were many contradictions in the information that was online about which type of root structure each one had. So we're going to set the record straight. The Alocasia is actually a vertical rhizome. And I have an example here. Normally when you have a rhizome, it would be positioned horizontally. But the Alocasia actually is a vertical rhizome. It still has nodes, it still has internodes and scale leaves that you can see here. It has axillary buds and an actual terminal bud, which will be on the growing point. But this is actually a swollen stem, which makes it a rhizome. And then the roots will develop from this bottom piece, which you can see here. Now, the Colocasia is actually a corum. The big difference is a corum is going to be much more round, and it's a swollen basal portion of an underground stem. It'd be like the very bottom part of an onion where the roots grow out. That hardened structure at the bottom is a basal plate. So corum is a basal plate, and it's very round and swollen. And lots of times you'll see concentric rings that will go around the corum. That's another way you can tell it's a corum. And it's just much wider than the rhizome, which again is a stem. The corum will also die at the end of a season, and at the base of that corum you'll get cormels, which are basically new corums. They're also called cormels. So now that we can clearly tell that there is a difference between an Alocasia and a Colocasia, we can talk about the process of actually overwintering. In this process, it's fairly simple, and we're going to talk about some tools that you'll need. So before you start, you want to get these tools together and have them readily available. A couple of things that you'll need, obviously if you have a plant in the ground, you need a shovel, because you're going to be digging it out. And if it's been in the garden this whole time, it's probably got a pretty large root system. Another thing that you're going to need is you're going to need, you might need a spade to help you tease out any of the roots that are stuck. For cutting, I have a pair of pruning shears here, but you can also use a clean, sterile garden knife or even a machete. And for the purposes of what I did, mine were very large, so I actually used a machete. You're also going to want to have containers ready for transport. You'll want to be thinking about where you're going to wash the plants off, so you're going to need a sink or a water hose nearby. And then you want to think about how or where you're going to store these rhizomes. It's got to be a place that's for dry storage, so think about that. And the other thing that you're really going to need is a pair of gloves. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. And then you also want to have some masking tape handy to go along with your gloves. And you might also want to have some long sleeve clothing and some long pants. This process for me was very messy, so I would highly recommend using clothes that you don't really care about. And the last two things on our list, this masking tape and these gloves, they're very important. Alocasia and other plants of this family, they come from a family of plants that have varying amounts of chemical compounds in them, and they're in the plant tissue itself. They could be in the leaves, the petiole, and the rhizome. And these chemical compounds actually can cause irritation on the skin. It can be mild or it can be severe, and it's going to depend on your skin sensitivity. So, this is something that you really want to take into consideration and be prepared for before you start cutting anything. The reason for the skin irritation is actually a chemical called calcium oxalate. And your skin is actually not irritated due to a chemical reaction. It's actually irritated due to the crystal-like shape of this calcium oxalate, and it's a needle-like shape. So once it gets on the skin, the crystals will actually scrape and they will poke into the skin. And what happens is you then feel a burning or intense itching, and it's a sensation that usually will happen within a minute of contact. You'll know if you've got this on your skin. And the length of the sensation, again, it'll vary due to your skin sensitivity, but usually within 10 to 15 minutes, you're fine. Another thing you want to think about is, if you do get this sap or plant material on you and you're feeling this burning sensation, that's why we have masking tape. The amount of irritation that you get is going to depend upon how much you got on the affected area. So you don't want to be rubbing it around. The only way to get it off is to literally remove it. So what you'll then want to do is you'll use your masking tape or any kind of other adhesive that's removable, and you'll just take a piece off and you'll stick it over the affected area, and then you just pull off. And it may take a couple of those to do that area, but you should lessen the effect of the irritation. So obviously, since this is going to cause irritation on your skin, really want to impress, do not eat this. Don't eat it, don't ingest it. It doesn't matter what the plant part is, just don't do it. It is true that some cultures do consume this plant and plants of a similar family that have sort of the same effects. But they are well informed of the special treatment that is required to consume these plants. And over here, that's not something that most of us are very familiar with. So again, I just want to reiterate, do not consume or ingest any part of this plant because it could be fatal. You could be severely allergic to this, or you could maybe just have a burning sensation, but it's not something to chance. So again, when we're cutting, we want to wear the protective clothing, especially gloves. When I did this again, I did get some on me. I had gloves, I had short sleeve shirt on, and I had pants. But even though I was careful when I was transporting the larger rhizomes, once you cut the top leaves off, you're exposing that part of the plant, and so it will send sap to that area. And so that's when I got infected on my forearms. So it wasn't like super intense, but it was definitely irritating. And so after about 10 minutes though, it was gone. So again, I just want to reiterate, just wear some long sleeve clothes and your gloves for sure. Okay, so the process of preparing these plants for overwintering is very simple. You just need to pay attention to a few details. And this is a good time to mention that if you want a step-by-step process, I'll be uploading a PowerPoint link that you'll be able to access, and you can follow this along with your PowerPoint and really get a detailed description of how to do these steps. So the first step in the process is going to be cutting the petioles back. You want to do this within about 6 inches or so of the hardened stem area. And again, I have some examples right here that I can show you. Let me go ahead and get my gloves on. So here are some examples. And so you can see you have a green growing area, and then you have the brown stem right here. That is actually the rhizome. So you want to cut the majority of the leaves off so that it makes it easier for you to dig and transport and clean the rhizomes. You know, and when you're cutting these things, you want to make sure that you're using clean, sterile tools so that you're not infecting any of the rhizomes with disease or something that another plant had that you were using previous to this. The thing that you want to remember is just make clean cuts, because eventually the green area will die back and you'll just be left with the actual rhizome part. But again, for this, the purpose is removing the bulk of the plant so it's easier to deal with. So before you dig, you want to make sure that you remove any of the excess plant material that may be around the root zone, because this is going to reduce the risk of coming in contact with the sap. You don't want to be reaching down and then you happen to brush along one of the petioles that you cut off. So, I'll give you a quick example of how this can be done. So, we have this alocasia right here. I obviously already dug this out of the ground, but if you will pretend that this guy is still in the ground, you would then just come along with your shears. Let's see if I can do this here. And you are literally just going to cut and break off the petioles. And you'll do this to all of them till they look like the first example that I showed you. Again, very messy. Don't wear anything nice. So, after you have trimmed back the petioles and leaves of the alocasia, you can then start to dig around the mass that will be at the bottom by the rhizome. You want to leave somewhere between 8 inches to a foot of soil between the main stem or cluster of stems. We had clusters of stems because ours hadn't been divided in quite some time. So we just left the clusters together and dug about a foot around the outside of the clusters. You know, you don't want to damage the rhizomes while you're doing this, so you just want to be very careful not to break off any pieces of the rhizome. Because what will happen is, if you leave an open wound like that for dry storage, it's going to be more likely that it's going to rot, and then it could contaminate your other rhizomes as well when it's storing. Once the roots are free from the soil, you'll want to lean your plant over horizontally, put it on its side, and then you're going to want to dislodge any of the soil that's left around the roots and up to the rhizome itself. So, again, pull this guy out. When you're done, you should have something that looks like this. You should see the end of the rhizome, the top short, and you should be able to see the roots at the bottom and at the base. So you can see that right there. And if you weren't sure if you had an alocasia or a colocasia, you would definitely be able to see at this point if you had a corm or if you had a rhizome. And as you can see, these are clearly rhizomes. When we had our cluster too, I want to mention that if you have a cluster and you can pull them apart gently where you're not actually breaking any part of the rhizome and it already has its own roots, this is just as good a time as in the spring to go ahead and separate it, because at this point it's actually a different plant and you just have multiple plants that are just very close to each other. So go ahead and pull those apart if you can do that without breaking the rhizome. And I do want to mention too that our cluster, we ended up getting about 15 plants from the 4 clusters that we had. So over time, you can really build up a large volume of these. Next, you want to think about transportation for these. You need to get them to wherever you're going to wash them, and then after that, dry storage. So we used a wheelbarrow and old containers. You know, you can use whatever you have to be able to just move them to a different area. You just want to be careful again that you're not going to damage any of the rhizomes in this process. And then once you get them to wherever you're going to be washing them, which is the next step, you're going to wash the excess soil and plant debris from the rhizome and the roots. Where we are, we have a large double sink, so we process them in there. And we just use a lukewarm water. You don't want it to be freezing because you'll shock them, and you don't want it to be hot because you'll burn them. So a good in between. And you just gently put them under the water, and you'll start to remove some of this excess scale right here, and some of this plant debris that's already decaying. And again, you can see that some of this on here is wet, so this is really important that you're wearing gloves because you can still be affected by the chemical compounds in this. So you just want to clear this off, and you may even decide to cut these a bit shorter if you didn't get them to where you wanted them in the beginning when you cut them. And I have an example of one after we washed it. You can see that the roots are white, and the base here has no soil on it. And again, at this point, I'd probably just touch this up a bit at the top, but other than that, it looks really good. After you wash them, then it's really important that you allow them to dry out thoroughly. For an initial drying period for these, I would give it at least 24 hours. You want to just put them on a surface that has air and ventilation around it. And you don't want to put it in direct sunlight to dry, just in an area where it's not going to be too cold and it gets lots of ventilation. After 24 hours of drying, you'll come back and check on your rhizomes. At that point, you want to just turn them over and make sure that there's no wetness underneath, that the rhizome itself is dry, there's no wet spots. You just want to make sure that it's completely dry. It's very important. Once your rhizomes are dry, or while they're drying, you need to pick a media for the rhizomes to be stored in. What we do is we use recycled old trays from flats, and we clean them, and then we use them again for projects like this. We'll fill the bottom of the tray with a perlite, which is a volcanic glass that it's expanded for horticultural use, and so I'd like to show you that. So right here, we have the used tray that we're recycling, and then we have the perlite, which is the expanded volcanic glass. This is super light, So that's one reason that we like to use this, because we'll be moving these to a final destination. It's like very light chalk is what it's like. When you're using perlite, it does create a little bit of a dust, which you may be able to see. So if you're actually pouring this into something, you'll want to wear a dust mask, and you'll want to do it in a ventilated area. This was pre-poured in here, so didn't have to worry about that. But you don't have to use perlite. You just want to use anything that will stay dry, again allows airflow, and can be easily removed or replaced should something go wrong and you do get some rotting. That way you can just remove that portion of the perlite and replace it with clean, new sterile perlite. At this point, once you've got your cleaned and dry rhizome, you'll want to then just place them on the perlite or whatever medium that you're choosing to use. So basically, I would just leave this on here, and I'd probably have, depending on your size, ours are really large this year, so I'd probably only put 2 on each one of these trays. But if you had some smaller ones, you could probably put 4 to a tray. It just depends on the size of the rhizomes that you have. Once you've got them on the trays, then you want to pick a destination for these to chill out for the winter. So when you're thinking about an area, it needs to be an area that will stay dry. It has very little light. It can have a little bit of light, but it needs to be very little light. And the temperatures need to stay above freezing. Somewhere around 50 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit is good. And what this does is it slows down the metabolic rate of the plant, and it will induce a state of dormancy that should last you till the spring, when you're ready to pull them out again, and then you can watch them come alive again. Once you've got them in your spot, in your chosen spot, you just want to remember for the first month, you want to check them once a week. You want to remove any rotting or wet plant material that has developed on the rhizome. And if you do get some that will just completely rot, just remove the whole thing. It's not worth wasting the rest of your rhizomes just to see if one will survive. If it's rotting, just go ahead and get rid of it. And so once you have that and you've done your first month once a week check, after that you really only need to check it once a week for the first month, but once a month for the remaining months until the spring. Again, if you have any problems during those last couple of months, just remove it, and you shouldn't have any problems after that. When you're wanting to reintroduce them, you can just go ahead and replant them in some media indoors. Probably, I would say, at least 2 months before you're really wanting to plant them outside, and that'll give you a good head start on getting some mature leaves and some good size on your alocasias before you go ahead and put them outside. So that's basically the process of overwintering the alocasia. And now that you know how to overwinter the Alocasia and Macrorrhizos, you can try these techniques on other tender herbaceous perennials as well. And this will save space in your home and money in your pocket by overwintering instead of throwing your plants away. And if you should have any questions, you can leave them below this video. I'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks.